The next speaker represents an organization that's been very good for AMI.
Mike.
He's the president of the Council of Georgia's organization and director of Saving Communities. He's effected some tax shifts and land values in Pennsylvania cities, land and money monopolies. He examines the parallels and differences of the land question and the money question. Makes the case that these issues are the most fundamental issues before us. Georgia's are some of our best allies. Please welcome Dan Sullivan.
Yeah, we weren't always best allies, but we're getting better. The time is short. I have 30 minutes, and I tried to get this down, and I think I got it down to 20, but I'm not sure. So time is short, and the concept is new to some of you. So if you would write down your questions and try to get them as concise as possible, and I'll try to get concise answers, which is quite a sacrifice for me. So anyhow, I should use this. Just to explain how it works. In property tax, if you keep your property up, you pay a real high tax. And if you run your property down, you pay a low tax. But with land value tax, the taxes are, it's distorted because I'm closer. The taxes are the same no matter what you do with the land. And if you replace wage tax with land tax, the taxes are the same no matter what you do with your land. And if you replace business taxes, all these things, the taxes are the same no matter what. Now, in Pittsburgh's poorest community, in Pittsburgh's richest community, the land value is about 110 times what it is in the poorest community. So as you make the shift, the poor neighborhoods, people who are willing to live in the poor neighborhoods, or the people who are living there now, end up paying about 1/100th of what people in the richest neighborhoods are paying. And that would gradually shift. The poorer neighborhoods would become more attractive, the richest neighborhoods would become less attractive, and it would equalize that way. I wanted to get into the history of this because, here, let me go back. Well, there are a bunch of direct parallels between land and money. I want you, if you have Zarlinga's picture on the cover of that thing, and he has his books on display, and he had made a presentation, that's at the Henry George Foundation. So the picture that we're using to honor Stephen Zarlinga is our thing. But we've had a lot of mixed reactions in the Georgist movement, and we'll probably have similar reactions here. And I call it, it boils down to my issue is bigger than your issue. And as long as we play that game, the alliance is weakened. So I try to get my fellow Georgists not to play that game. And I'm going to ask you to have the same kind of attitude. Now this is the Free Soil Party. This is much older. You know, Jefferson and Payne and Franklin and William Penn and Jefferson, Payne, Franklin, and Penn all supported monetary reform. They were all advocates of land value tax. The European liberals, not so much on land value, on monetary reform, because the banks, it was harder to take on the bankers in England than it was to take on the English bankers in America. So it's always easier to do something when you're far away from the people who don't like it. But the Free Soil Party was formed for two reasons. One was that the Democratic Party was all slavers, and the Republican Party, or not the Republican Party, the Whig Party was bankers and land grabbers. So they didn't feel at home with either party, and that's why they formed the Free Soil Party. And then the Republican Party took over the Free Soil Party, but a bunch of Whigs joined the Republican Party, so it wasn't very long before the Republican Party was taken over by land grabbers and bankers. But if you look at these two planks, okay, there were 12 anti-slavery planks, because that was the issue of the day. But they also said all men have a natural right to a portion of the soil. And as the use of the soil is indispensable to life, the right of all men to the soil is as sacred as the right to life itself. That the public lands of the United States belong to the people, and should not be sold to individuals nor granted to corporations, but should be held as a sacred trust for the benefit of the people, and should be granted in limited quantities free of cost to landless settlers. Now, there is a problem with free of cost, because all land has a different value, and rent is a natural phenomenon. Rack rent is not. Rack rent is people having to pay ridiculous amounts of money because other land is being held out of use. The more land you hold out of use, the more you can rack rent the remaining land that people are needing. They also said that a due regard for the federal Constitution and a sound administrative policy demand that the funds of the general government be kept separate from banking institutions. Now, that's not quite sufficient either, but they understood that there was a problem with us being dependent on banking institutions. They didn't necessarily there's nothing in their platform that had the answer. So, anybody know who these two people are?
Henry George.
Bottom right is Henry George. Anybody know who the top left one is? That's top left.
Butler?
No. Oh, he looks vaguely like Butler. That's Terence Powderly. Terence Powderly was, he got elected to 3 terms as the mayor of Scranton on the Greenback Labor Party ticket. While he was mayor of Scranton, he became the head of the Knights of Labor, which at that time, under Powderly's direction, was the largest labor union in the country. It went up from 60,000 to 700,000 in 1 year. Part of that is it had been founded by Masons. He got rid of a lot of the Masonic secrecy and stuff to make it acceptable to the Catholic Church, because almost all the working poor were Catholics, and you couldn't unionize Catholics under the Masons or they'd get excommunicated. So that was part of it. But Terence Powderly said, if we didn't have banking monopoly, we wouldn't need labor unions. Now, that's a really extreme thing for the head of the largest labor union to say, that we wouldn't be necessary if not for banking. And the Knights of Labor platform in 1878 said, resolved to prevail upon governments to establish a purely national circulating medium based on the faith and resources of the nation and issued directly to the people without the intervention of any system of banking corporations, which money shall be legal tender in payment of all debts, public or private. That's exactly what's being proposed here. And so here's Terence Powderly, who totally got that. Now, here's on land. In my opinion, the main all-absorbing question of the hour is the land question. Make your currency of what material you choose. But if I own the land, you cannot base your currency upon the wealth of the nation, for that wealth is the land. You may make the laws and own the currency, but give me the land and I will absorb your wealth and render your legislation null and void. That quote was not Henry George. That quote was Terence Powderly. So Terence Powderly was big on land reform, big on money reform, and had exactly the right attitude of pulling the two together. Now, Henry George, on the other hand, lapsed into this. And to be fair to Henry George, he's quoting a follower, a supporter of his, who was in an argument with a money reformer. And the money said, yeah, the land question, but the money question is the big issue. And so the follower said, and Henry George quoted him, well, suppose you had all the money in the world and I had all the land in the world. What would you do if I gave you notice to quit, if I evicted you? And I think that's a real dumb thing to say for 3 reasons. First of all, it's a reduction to absurdity. And if you want to play the absurdity game, if I had all the money, I would say, well, how are you going to evict me? Because you have to pay the sheriff. And I have all the money. And the second reason is, the same people who have all the money have all the land. You know, the landowners are just collecting rent, and they can get into banking, and the bankers are foreclosing property, and they become landowners. There is no, you have all the money and I have all the land. The same people are going to have it all. And the third thing is, it's just bad diplomacy when you're trying to build a coalition between the money people and the land people. Henry George was just saying you can't dismiss the land issue. So if you get the context of this quote, it wasn't all that bad. But when I started bringing up money with the Georges, they would bring up this quote, or a variation, if you had all the money and I had all the land, what would I charge you for one night's rent? That was their version of it. And so a lot of Georges were dismissing the land question, and it's one of the reasons I got Stephen Zarlenga into, I'm on the program committee and I do a lot of the stuff, and I got Zarlenga into talk at the Georges conference 2 or 3 times. And some of the people were really fascinated by it, and some of them were just like, what's he doing here? This is a land reform conference. And so that problem of people staying in their narrow focus, my dad's a plumber, and I used to be a plumber's helper. And I never asked this question, but if I had asked the question, well, what's more important, plumbers or electricians? He would say, what do you mean? They're both vitally important. I say, yeah, but is one more important? And he'd say, yeah, plumbers are more important. Because plumbers put the shirt on your back and the food on your table. And that's what makes the plumber more important to you. Okay? Doesn't make the plumber more important to the world, it makes the plumber more important to you. So I'm a land reformer because I have 40 years of expertise in land. And I have been fascinated with the money question, but I don't have nearly the expertise in money that I have in land. So to me, the land question is more important for me to pursue, but it has nothing to do with what's more important to the world. Julian Assange, when they asked Julian Assange, well, do you prefer Trump or Clinton? He said, that's like asking me to choose between cholera and gonorrhea. And everyone knew which one was cholera and which one was gonorrhea. And the reason I bring that up is that land monopoly or money monopoly and land monopoly are like cholera and gonorrhea, because cholera gives, every 18 years you get an outbreak of cholera, and if you survive it, you're okay till the next outbreak. But land monopoly will just insidiously grow and get worse. But so does cholera, because each time you get a bout of cholera, the banks get stronger and you get weaker, and so cholera will eventually kill you too. And if you have gonorrhea, you're going to be less resistant to cholera. And if you've had cholera, you'll be less resistant to gonorrhea. So the land monopoly and the money monopoly are not only both important, but they interact. You know, the mortgages are because banks lend a lot of money during boom years, and landlords drive up the price during boom years, and the two just go hand in hand with each other. Land and money both originate as a commons. So land was here, money was not here, but land was here. It was available to everybody, and some people grabbed it up so they could charge rent to other people. And money should originate as a commons, but once the money is issued, each person holds his own parcel of land, and each person has what money he has traded for. So that money is your personal private property once it's exchanged with people. But it's issued as a commons. It's part of the commons. And so that ideology is central to both the land reformers and the money reformers. Land's value comes from the quality and productivity of people near that land. So if you live in a neighborhood where your neighbors are all affluent and the businesses do great business because the neighbors are affluent, your land value is high. If you're in a land area where people are poor and they're not producing much wealth, your land value is low. Money doesn't have that locational relationship, but it comes from the value of money comes from the production and services that have been created within that system. That's why people say inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. The people who produce the goods are the people who created the value of the money. And landlords and bankers are renting us what is rightly our land in the first place, and bankers are lending us what is rightly our money in the first place. So that's another parallel. We tax producers who create the land value instead of taxing the people who collect that value or hold land out of use. And we tax producers who give the value to money and let the bankers issue that money and lend it to the producers. If we issued, in either case, if we issued the money, we could tax people less. If we collected the land rent, we could tax productive people less. So land and money should both be used. These are the three options for what you do with the money you collect. Whether you collect it from land or whether you issue new money. It can be used to provide government services. It can be used to replace taxes on productivity. And it can be given to each member of the community on a per capita basis. Now, it can also be loaned out. If we want to go into this gradually, the Federal Reserve is going to have to keep lending money to banks for a while till people save up enough money that they can deposit it in banks and get past that. But those are ultimately, that's what we want to do. And that's what the land reformers want to do too. They either want to provide services, cut productivity taxes, or give each person a share. Now, the underlying unifying concept is privilege, which is Latin. It came from the Latin, and it also came from the Latin from private and the Latin for legislation. So privilege is a contraction of private legislation. It's not an English, the English didn't contract it, it was pre-contracted by the Romans, and we Anglified it. But privilege is any law that gives some people a benefit at the expense of other people. So banking privilege is created by law. Our land system, where we privatize the rent that society generates, is created by law. The big three privileges, because there's three factors of production. There's land, labor, and capital. That's classical liberal economics. That's Henry George. Marx conflated them all. And since then, and the anti-Marxists liked it being conflated. Marx did it so he could attack capital as if it were land, and the other people did it so they could defend land as if it were capital, and defend money and banking as if it were capital. But the classical liberals, money was not capital because it was not wealth. It was a claim on wealth. But claims on wealth, this was, Adam Smith wrote it, called his book The Wealth of Nations, because it doesn't make any difference to the nation. If you liberate all the slaves, the nation is not poorer. You know, the slave owners are poorer, but the slaves are richer because they now own their freedom. And if rent goes down or up, the nation is not any richer or poorer. And if we abolish banking and issued the money directly, the nation is not any richer or poorer, unless it starts working better. You know, nations function better without slavery, because slaves will only work as hard as they have to, and you have to beat them to get them to work any harder. But free people will work because there's just a lot of positive incentives to work. So those are the things, and we've abolished chattel slavery pretty much, except for prison labor and stuff. But land and capital, I did it in a different program and reformatted it to PowerPoint. So the capital should have been on one line. But true capital is labor products. You can't, if the land is free and the labor is free, the capital is automatically free unless you control the money. So the money issue is why capital itself is not free. So all three systems are not free, except for labor is not directly enslaved anymore, but it's indirectly harmed by these other monopolies. You don't have to, this is one of the objections, you don't have to own land. And people will say, well, you don't have to borrow money. But if you don't own land, you have to rent from somebody who does, and you have to work for somebody who does. And even if you're, and even if you're working in computer programming to make video games, your customers are making money on land, and if they weren't making more than their rent, they couldn't buy your video games. So no matter what you do, it might be very indirect. You know, You're indirectly working for a landlord. And the money you're getting paid with, you might not have borrowed, and the people who paid you might not have borrowed it. But somebody borrowed it, or it wouldn't be there. So there's another parallel between land and money. Now, here's differences. Land value must fluctuate because the supply is fixed. Where with money, the supply has to fluctuate because you want the value to be fixed. It's essential to money that the value be fixed and the supply fluctuate. With land, every parcel's value is unique. With money, every bill's value is standardized. And money is the ultimate, most liquid thing in the world, and land is fairly illiquid. You have trouble, you have to go through a lot of rigmarole to sell real estate. Land is regulated by local governments, which makes it easier for us. We can get land value tax at the local level in some states. And like Pennsylvania has 1,000 municipalities, so if one municipality doesn't want to do it, we got to talk to the next municipality. Money is regulated by national governments, so that makes your job harder than our job. And you can't live without land, and you can't pay taxes without money. And if you don't pay taxes, they'll put you in jail. So you can't live without money either, unless you consider living in jail to be living. One of the objections, you can't trust government to assess the rental value of land. Well, government's been assessing land really, really well for a long, long time. And the places that aren't assessing it well don't want to assess it well. Because the landlords are the ones who try to stop them from assessing it well. And with money, you can't trust government to issue the right amount of money. Well, that's the other objection. But the problem is, now let's see how the private landlords do. The private landlords are totally arbitrary. They charge whatever the market will bear. During boom years, they raise the rents and they raise the selling prices by ridiculous amounts. And they hold land out of use during recessions. And I bought this land and I thought I could sell it for this much, and I can't. And if you're a big landlord and you have deep pockets, you wait till the next recession is over, so the land market dries up when there's a recession. And the banks overlend during boom years. They issue way more money than they should because real estate is hot and it's going up in value. And if somebody forecloses on you, if the bank has to foreclose on you, they take an asset that's worth a lot more than it was when they loaned out the money. So during boom years, the banks issue way too much money. Then when there's a recession, they suddenly stop making loans, which means they stop issuing money, and the recession gets worse. So there's another parallel between land and money. And the LVT victories have always been local and in distressed communities. You only are willing to take on the landlords if your community is distressed, because you have to. And I had politicians go to the big landowners in Pittsburgh and stuff, and explain it to them and say, it's not personal, it's just we're in a lot of trouble and we have to do this. And the landlords accepted it. They didn't like it, but they accepted it. They respected him for coming to them, and they also respected him for making it clear that it wasn't personal. The money victories will most likely happen in small distressed countries. So I don't see Germany. Germany is now the banker to Europe. I don't see Germany straightening out the money system. In fact, I see Hitler rolling over in his grave or looking up from hell and saying, why didn't I think of that? Because Germany now controls Europe much more than Hitler did. And they did it bloodlessly by becoming the dominant country under the euro, which is a dead money system as well. But I see Greece and Iceland as being prime targets for monetary reform. I see little distressed communities in the Pacific Rim becoming. And the natural allies, the universal basic income people are natural allies. You can't fund universal basic income without doing land value tax and monetary reform. Otherwise, the rent will just go up. especially in the poor neighborhoods. It might get down in the rich neighborhoods where people are paying into the, high-income people, if they're paying an income tax, their rent might go down because they don't want to pay as much for land, because now they're paying an income tax. In the poor communities, the rent will go up. So you have to collect the land value and prevent people from holding land out of use, or the universal basic income will get swallowed by landlords. And the same thing, I'm not as clear on how bankers would swallow it, but all this money is debt money, so it's going to get swallowed one way or the other. The other natural allies are the non-bureaucratic left. Those are the people who really want to help, but are not wedded. The bureaucratic left is intimidated by the idea that the free market can work, or the privileged free market can work. I never say free market, I always say privileged free market, because if there's no such thing, I had a libertarian talk about how the free market would have eventually abolished slavery, and I said, if there's slavery, it's not a free market. It's only a free market in your fantasy. If a market is not free of privilege, it's not free. And the anti-privilege right, there's lots of libertarians who support this, but the vocal libertarians are the hard right, and the vocal Greens are the hard left, and so it's harder to get people to agree to anything that the other side likes. And landlords and bankers are natural adversaries in a way, because landlords want people to have more money and lower interest rates so that they could, every time interest rates goes down, real estate prices go up. So the landlords, if you talk to the landlords about banking, they're going to say, yeah, if we got rid of banking monopoly, people could pay more for the land, and that landlords would like it. And if you got rid of land monopoly, or you had a land value tax so land prices were stable, the banks could say, okay, we can lend and we don't have to worry about there being a real estate crash because your land value tax has kept the land prices stable. So in a way, those people are adversaries, and we might be able to play them against each other. But really, we want to make the system better for everybody. And in the long run, everybody wins. The bankers might lose a lot of their privilege, but once the adjustment is concerned, banking will be much more stable, and bankers will be doing what they should have been doing all along. And the last thing is, if you want to get sources on Terence Powderly or Benjamin Butler, my website is savingcommunities.org, and you need the subtitle DOCS, which is Document Library. And there's a whole list of people. Look for Benjamin Butler and Terence Powderly, because they said really good stuff about money, and Powderly also about land. So that's it. And I guess we don't have time for questions.
We're going to have a PowerPoint.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.